Paris stands between revolutions in 1796. The Directory rules by decree and dinner invitation, and the churches speak softly, but do not forget. A Corsican-born general, Napoleon Bonaparte, is given the army of Italy, and in the mirror he sees more than epaulettes. The widow he loves, born Marie-Joseph Rosé Tachère de la Pagerie, whom he will call Joséphine, once moved through salons where favors were a currency. As a girl, she knew a Caribbean island where enslaved men and women cut cane under a sun that gave more than it forgave. In their union, lineage and law will wrestle with longing. The stakes will not be two hearts only, but the very grammar of empire, legitimacy, church sanction, the making of heirs, and the crafting of a name that will outlast breath. Morning in Paris smells of damp stone and warm bread, and in the narrow rooms of Rue Chantereine, a bell knocks gently against its hook. Josephine's household wakes in layers. A maid smooths a green silk gown across a chair. A boy in livery lays a fan on a table and checks the clock's anxious hands. He pauses at the little dish where a single key rests, the key to the writing desk that holds letters tied with blue ribbon. The key is not there. Outside, a carriage wheel grinds on the curb. Napoleon arrives in a frock coat he wears like armor, sleeves dusted with chalk from map chalk, pocket heavy with a signet ring that presses his skin like a reminder. He is 26, eager, brilliant, insolent. She is older, her eyes edged in experience, a survivor of a prison so cold that breath turned to frost. Her first husband died by decree during the Terror. She learned then that a name can be a raft and a millstone. They are married by a civil officer in a room that smells of ink and damp wool, with a registrar's pen making its tidy scratches across the page. Witnesses whisper, the ages entered do not align with baptismal records. Digits tilt. Calendar columns show a confidence that feels like theater. Some say it's a clerk's mistake. Others say the truth was trimmed to fit a better story. The Directory likes plausible fictions. The church, at least for now, is not invited. Josephine's son and daughter, Eugène and Hortense, stand apart like timepieces set to a different hour, measuring the distance between a past with one surname and a future that might demand another. It rains. Napoleon presses a small box into her palm. Inside, a ring with two stones nestled together, diamond and sapphire, toi et moi, as Paris jewelers call it. 2 stones, 2 futures yoked into a single loop. He fastens it to her finger as if fastening his own heartbeat. A fan opens and shuts like a second heartbeat in the room. She smiles, a rueful, private thing. She knows what rings can promise and what they cannot command. Rumor says a director, balanced between ledger and bedchamber politics, encouraged the match. Rumor also says Josephine chose it as any woman would, who has known uncertainty and wanted shelter that did not feel like surrender. We do not know the exact weight of calculation in either heart. We know, because the ink tells us, that the vow was made. The veil is invisible, but it is there, woven of hopes, theater, and the long reach of a hungry century. The afternoons at Rue Chantereine fall into a pattern. Josephine's salon opens like a stage. Chairs collect ministers and musicians, a few generals' wives, a lady with too much perfume and a laugh that is almost a sob. Servants glide with tact and teacups, the floor mindful of creaks. The talk is about Italy, about shoes that cannot stand another march, about saints no longer honored and saints newly invented. When the house empties and the carriage lamps move like planets along the street, she returns to her desk. The lock has a slight catch. She hums when it sticks. Inside are letters from Napoleon that smell faintly of horse and the salt of distant sweat. The general writes as if the page could answer him. He has already gone to the front, already dreaming of towns whose names will be medals. In his letters, the words bend and flicker. He wants her there, wants the cathedral of her attention. He sketches futures. Some nights he forgets the date. Some nights he writes it 3 times, as if to seal it against theft. The specter arrives before the 2nd month. The church. It does not knock. It settles over the marriage like a patient judge already measuring the sentence. Civil registers are the new laws of the Republic, yes, but bishops remember the older vows. If the tide should turn, and tides have been turning since 1789, can a promise made without a priest stand before an altar? Napoleon answers such questions with speed, not certainty. He hires more scribes. Josephine keeps her rosary in a drawer and closes it softly, as one closes a window that no longer quite fits the frame. They eat together when they can. A maid lays out plates with bruised peaches and torn bread and cheese cut on the diagonal. It looks like a peasant's supper, like a painting that wants to be simple. The household is not simple. A boy sent to the butcher returns with gossip in his eyes. The army of Italy is starved. The fortresses are crumbling. The general is a gambler without tables. Josephine brushes crumbs from her lap and asks him to lower his voice. She knows what fear does when it sits at a table like an unwelcome relative. A courier arrives wet from the road, boots leaving a trail of honest mud. He sets down a sealed letter with wax showing the pressure of Napoleon's signet. She breaks the seal with a hairpin. The words hiss up from the page as if released from a bottle. Her mouth softens. Her eyes harden. Passion is both a balm and a leash, and she recognizes leashes. She answers with caution, shaping her sentences like porcelain teacups. Thin, strong, meant to carry heat without breaking. Somewhere a bell at a neighboring church rings the hour. She folds the paper, presses the edge smooth, and seals it with wax that smiles and then freezes. The house settles. In the room above, Hortense sings a song from a quieter time. Josephine goes to the window and holds the curtain like a veil. In the street below, men in blue coats move like a tide toward a harbor none of them has ever seen. Anomalies begin like rain that taps before the storm. A note is delivered late and out of breath. The footman swears the messenger could not find the door, though the door is a city rumor. A carriage meant for the opera detours to a villa on the outskirts for no better reason than a broken trace that looks not broken. A glove, black velvet with a faded lining, is discovered behind a screen in the gallery, and the maid who finds it pretends she has not seen the crest stitched inside. In Milan, Napoleon writes that his victories are crisp as clean sheets, that the cannon teach obedience to his will. He writes also that the nights come with an ache only her name can ease. He imagines her walking through rooms where sunlight touches mirrors and disappears. He imagines her waiting. In Paris, the hour is not obedient. Josephine's calendar fills with social duties, and with those duties that have no polite word. Ministers' wives lean close and let slip the news that the city is watching her. Does she understand what her absence at the front means for his reputation? Does she understand that the Republic is gathering men like stones to build a monument around her husband, and that a monument houses no living tenderness? At the stables, a young groom witnesses a conversation he will remember more for its silence than its words. A man in a gray coat, his hat brim low, speaks to Josephine just beyond the arch, where the horses cannot hear. Their exchange is not fevered, it is civilized, as strategic kindness can be. The groom looks down at his hands, which smell of hay and iron, and counts to 30. When he glances up, there is only her. The man scent, a cologne with citrus and a shadow of something darker, hangs for half a minute longer, like an afterthought that will not settle. Letters from Italy stack on the hall table. They arrive in a staccato and are answered in legato. An attendant, new to service, anxious to please, accidentally opens one addressed not to Josephine, but to the general's valet. Inside, a different tone. Orders, demands, schedules. The attendant blushes, reseals it poorly, and prays no one will notice. Above the seal, fingerprints in the wax seem like the ridges of a heart that does not fit the cast made for it. It is in this haze of minor mistakes that major rumors are born. A clerk, entrusted with household accounts, notices small changes. A gift of ribbons charged to a name he does not recognize. a carriage fee to a neighborhood where salons are not held, a bouquet of camellias twice in a week when roses are usually preferred. He writes the entries without footnotes, but a certain ink blot near the camellias looks like a question mark. Later, historians will press their noses to these books and debate whether camellias are just flowers. At a dinner, a lady tells a tale of a picnic near Sèvres, where laughter was a performance, and a chessboard lay half-played until dusk. The names slide around the table like starlight on a pond. Nobody holds them long enough to make a charge. Josephine returns home that evening with the hem of her gown stained with grass, her fan closed as if it had lost the power to make breeze. She keeps to herself a new letter from Napoleon, kisses where the ink smudged, and hides it under a ledger that knows nothing of diamonds or the weight of waiting. Sometimes she thinks of Martinique, of rain like warm silk, of mud that remembers every footprint, of enslaved men and women whose names were kept in ledgers but not in portraits. She was born inside a system of violence she did not construct, but from which she benefited. Those fields of cane cut by hands she did not touch gilded the life that would carry her to Paris and to this table. She doesn't look away from the memory. Memory is a kind of witness and a kind of responsibility. The Directory had abolished slavery once. The sands are shifting again. There is talk that law can be asked to forget. The world she inhabits will not be easy to love, but she is not asked to love the world, only to navigate it. Servants are the city's true historians. An usher at the Théâtre Feydeau recognizes a figure in a private box. The man in the gray coat, named by some as a cavalry officer, perhaps no more than a cousin bearing news. The usher sees Josephine turn her head not at the music's climax, but at a pause between movements, as if listening for a different cue. He will tell no one, not out of loyalty to her of whom he knows little, but out of respect for the quiet dignity with which she receives a bouquet and gives a nod to a violinist whose bow is frayed. It is possible to be kind in a city that throttles kindness. It is possible to be tender without being naive. From Italy, Napoleon sends a miniature portrait of himself, a face idealized by a painter who knows both flattery and war. He instructs a jeweler to frame it in a locket and to insert a wisp of hair. His, he says, perhaps a groom's, sealed under glass. Josephine touches the locket like a rosary. She is grateful. She is also practical. She knows men who love themselves more than they love anyone else are still capable of extraordinary love. There are nights the household rests early, when the last candle is pinched and the last rug smoothed. On such a night, a letter arrives from a friend begging for a meeting at dawn. A letter delivered not by the regular courier, but by a boy who runs like he is running away. The ink crawls across the page about new customs officers, about property that is not one's own, being reclaimed by those with patience and seal. Josephine reads it twice and then tears it, not because there is fault in it, but because there is danger in keeping it. The pieces look like feathers until the fire hardens them into something like bone. Ambiguity, the city learns, is both shield and sword. If she hesitates before answering Napoleon's urgings to join him, the house explains it as illness. If she appears at a garden with her shawl pulled low, the press calls the shawl fine. Her daughter's future has to be weighed. Her son's position at the army must be held. Her survival requires that she be a mirror to men who cannot look directly at themselves. Somewhere, a scribe copies the rumor that she is not faithful, and somewhere else a different scribe copies a rumor that he is not either. Both rumors may be true. Both may serve someone. The second month becomes the third, and victory smells like leather and thunder. In Milan, the general tastes power and recognizes an old friend. In Paris, the rooms grow warm as spring rises outside. Josephine moves through her gallery, and her reflection moves with her. A woman who longs, who calculates, who remembers the chill of a prison wall and the comfort of a daughter's hand. She opens a drawer and finds the missing key. Not lost after all, simply slid beneath a folded ribbon. She holds it, then sets it down, then locks the drawer as if she could lock all the questions the city keeps asking. When she sleeps, she dreams of a bell ringing at dawn and of a ring turning under the lamplight as if trying to speak. Years pass in a hurry that looks like stillness. The calendar hardens into history. The Italian campaigns blaze. Egypt offers a mirage and then a lesson. The Directory teeters and falls. A door at Saint-Cloud opens onto November air, and a new consul carries himself as if his shadow were a cloak. They move into Tuileries, as if into a dream, where every corridor carries a past life's echo. Josephine buys Malmaison, a villa in Rouet, and fills it with glass and green, with roses that will not be hurried, with paintings whose subjects refuse to meet your eyes. But a crown is not just a circle. It is an argument dressed for church. In 1804, when Paris stares at its own reflection and sees an emperor looking back, the church names the price of blessing. The Pope's hands are old and steady. His gaze knows empires outlast and destroy love with equal casualness. The civil wedding of 96 will not suffice. The saint's book must receive the names, and the names must be spoken properly. Napoleon hesitates, then agrees. The sacramental knot tied quietly, cleanly. The night before, he will perform for the world a coronation that looks like destiny and also like a script. It happens after midnight at the Tuileries, between candles that drip with unhurried patience. An antechamber smells of beeswax and damp wool. Cardinal Fesch arrives with a book open to morning prayers, though the hour is long past morning. Family stands witness. Servants are dismissed to distant halls, where gossip will be folded into linen and stored carefully. The emperor-to-be wears a coat that whispers when he moves. Josephine wears a gown that makes no sound at all. The vow is spoken in low voices. The words belong to the church but feel like they belong equally to fear and need. He needs legitimacy. She needs continuity. He needs a crown that will not wobble on the law's head. She needs to secure a place for her children in a world whose appetite for widows is never kind. The ring, one of the rings, turns on her finger, catching light that has traveled from the altar. The signet on his hand warms under candle flare. There is a mistake nearly made. The document that should be signed disappears into a sheaf of papers to be sent to a chamberlain's desk and then elsewhere. The clerk assigned to mind it is young and careful. Even he is not permitted to bring the book into certain rooms. The paper's edge finds the wrong folder. A maid finds it later. The maid cannot read but knows a seal when she sees one. She returns it to the right desk, with a prayer that the saints mind civil servants, as kindly as they are said, to mind lost rings. Later, when lawyers look for reasons to untie what was tied, they will feel around this night as if searching in a pocket for a coin they are sure they once owned. In the morning, Paris inhales. Notre-Dame blooms under a sky white as polished bone. Bees, ancient Frankish emblems resurrected to outfly lilies, glitter on velvet. Napoleon crowns himself, and then he crowns Josephine. Her hands are steady. The crowd is less so. A nation that executed a king hears Latin and wonders if the clock has slipped. A crowd that loved a republic watches a woman kneel and wonders how much kneeling any story can ask of a person. She rises. She is Empress. She closes her fan and will not fidget. The day is theater, but the night remains a study in thresholds. The bedchamber door closes. We will not enter. We will say only that in the quiet wake are footprints in the nap of a carpet and damp on 2 perfume flacons. Hers a whisper of rose, his a clean, almost ascetic citrus. A ring left on a marble washstand turns once, then stills. Under the bed, far back, as if it had been hiding for a year, a small key winks. No one finds it until spring. By spring, the world speaks a new grammar. Empress sits in the mouth like a prayer and like a verdict. Josephine's role is to inhabit grace. Napoleon's is to conquer and to administer. He accomplishes the second by bending France to his vision with a code that will last longer than any anthem. He accomplishes the first by energy and talent, and a belief that the future can be persuaded, if not to love him, then at least to remember him. Malmaison becomes her sanctuary. She plants roses from everywhere she can name. She studies petals the way a minister studies treaties. Yet in the garden, the specter of consequence grows like nightshade along the fence. The marriage, now doubly bound, does not produce a child. Their attempts at hope move through time like a parade that refuses rain. Physicians arrive whose diplomas are impeccable and whose confidence is a kind of velvet cloak. They ask impertinent questions in polite voices. They recommend patience and prayer, sometimes oils for strength, sometimes old wives' tales dressed as modern remedies. Josephine submits and resists in equal measure. She is devout when it suits grief. She scolds herself for believing that grace is negotiable. Visitors bring news of a Europe that watches the Emperor's household with an eye for scandal and succession both. A rumor preserved in a lady-in-waiting Aga's diary. An officer's wife remarks that the Emperor's future may be carried in a bassinet, not his wife's. Another rumor, recorded later in a memoir. A child, acknowledged quietly, born to a woman not married to the emperor. Historians read the marks and the dates. They see in the boy's face a likeness that is either striking or simply human. This much the record confirms. At some hour of some day, Napoleon looked at a child not of this marriage and understood that desire and destiny were now in open disagreement. After coronation, the empire is a daily ritual. Bells ring at dawn and at dusk, and in between them 1,000 decisions gather like ash. Council chambers at the Tuileries fill with papers that smell of damp ink. Ministers argue with decimals and decrees. The emperor argues with silence that feels like a blade laid flat against a table. In an antechamber not far from these voices, Josephine waits with her hands folded in her lap, so that no one can say they trembled. She knows her presence is needed and also resented. She reminds some of them that power can be graceful. She reminds others that power will not forgive failure. In private, they try to untie the knot without cutting it. They pray, she with a rosary worn smooth at the edges, he with the single-mindedness of a soldier who has always believed that if he knocks hard enough, any door will open. Physicians return with new phrases for old mysteries. An apothecary's ledger in the archives still lists tinctures delivered to Malmaison and Saint-Cloud, items named so vaguely they might be perfume. A footnote penned in a different hand wonders why certain herbs were charged twice and not accounted for in reports. Nothing is proven. Everything is discussed. None of it feels like mercy. Hortense marries Louis, the emperor's brother, an arrangement that is both alliance and experiment. Perhaps a grandson will save the question from gnawing the furniture. The first child dies young, and grief moves through the house like a draft you cannot find. The second boy does not survive either. The third boy will grow to wear a crown years later and call himself by an old family name. But that future is beyond the window's frame for now. For now, Josephine sits with her daughter and mends a sleeve no one will notice, and speaks softly so the thread will not knot. Ministers speak the language of necessity. Dynastic arrangements are not ideals, they are engineering. A list circulates, written by a hand that knows how to spell power. Names of princesses whose wombs are imagined as treaties. The list is not shown to Josephine. She hears anyway. A lady tells a lady who tells another, and the rumor finds her in the gallery at Malmaison, where sunlight strokes the leaves of a palm. She does not ask who is on the list. She knows that knowing will change nothing, and cut everything. There is a confrontation, but not the kind you expect. No broken vases, no raised voices. In the yellow salon at Saint-Cloud, with the curtains pulled half closed against a stubborn sun, she asks him whether he believes the saints will bless a crown built upon an annulled love. He asks her whether France, an impatient child, deserves a future made less precarious by a cradle. They look at each other like navigators considering a shoal at dusk. At last he says quietly, as a man might speak to his own reflection, "I would not hurt you." It is true enough to break a heart. It is also not true enough to heal one. Councils are convened where law is worn like a glove turned inside out. The marriage, some argue, did not satisfy canon law. Therefore, it can be unmade by the very statutes that had once been asked to forget. Others counter that the night before sacrament makes it indissoluble, that the Pope's presence in Paris marks a sanction beyond manipulation. Papers fly like winter birds. Somewhere a clerk notes the absence of a certificate, and another clerk, perhaps one who once rescued a document mislaid, thinks of an antechamber and sweat between shoulder blades. Outside the palace, in streets where men sell chestnuts and women wash steps as if scrubbing could erase history's footprints, the empire feels like weather. An edict reinstates slavery in the colonies, a decision with the weight of iron. Families in Martinique and elsewhere learn that what had been law yesterday can be undone by a signature and a seal today. Josephine is said by some to have urged mercy. Others say she fell silent. Records are incomplete. Motives are complex. What is known is that men and women forced to labor under tropical suns paid for decisions made in Paris salons and under Paris chandeliers. The roses at Malmaison bloom magnificently. They do not testify. October 1809 brings a draft of an address dictated more to himself than to a stenographer. Napoleon speaks of the state, of bloodlines, of what must be done to protect a nation that has entrusted him with its next day. A friend of Josephine brings her a shawl, because the corridors are cold, and because kindness is a politics of its own. She accepts it with a smile that is not consent and not refusal, but an agreement that adults learn. That sometimes there is no right and only a least wrong. In their bedchamber, a door we withdraw from as always, their quiet becomes a language. They eat together politely when they can. They walk the long hallway at Saint-Cloud that smells of polish and lemon. She pauses at an alcove where a portrait hangs. A painter has captured her not as Empress, but as the woman she had been before titles. Her gaze turned sideways as if listening to a whisper from 1796. She touches the frame with a glove, and then removes the glove slowly, as if the glove were the only barrier left between skin and truth. The empire watches, as empires do, avid and often unkind. Some ladies bring fans to court that can crack like bones when snapped shut. Some men smile too widely when they mention the Austrian ambassador's presence at the opera. Newspapers scratch around the edges of the story like hens at a gate, pecking at truth and discarding what cannot be laid as an egg at someone's feet. The church stands like a carved bishop on a chessboard, moved or not moved by hands that do not pray. At last, there is no longer a question, but a date. She hears it first not from him, but from a woman who cares for her hair and has a brother in the prefect's office. When the moment arrives, Josephine dresses herself with particular calm. She chooses pearls instead of diamonds. Pearls are made under pressure, and born of irritation turned into beauty. She takes one ring off and leaves another on, the twin stones warmed by her pulse. Somewhere, an old key in a dish shines as if it had waited for this hour. In December 1809, in the Tuileries, under ceilings painted with allegories that refuse to lower their eyes, the court is summoned. Chairs are arranged in two precise arcs. A clerk clears his throat in a way that says he has done this once before in another life, perhaps when a duchess needed her name altered for inheritance reasons. Napoleon stands, then sits, then stands again. Josephine enters not as Empress for a ceremony, but as a woman coming to say a sentence that will rearrange her bones. She reads from a page prepared in respectful phrases. For the sake of France, for the peace of the empire, for the future that requires a child she cannot give, she consents to an annulment that will preserve mutual regard. The language is almost tender. The room hears between the lines the crack of something older, like ice breaking far out on a river. Napoleon's reply is brief and almost formal. He thanks her for sacrifice and calls her, still, his friend. He does not say what the floor wants him to say, that he is breaking his own heart and remaking it into a crown. The floor is wise. It says nothing. Relatives sign. A special tribunal meets in the new year to make legal what was decided in the heart. They examine records and absence of records. They inspect a wedding night scribble from 1804 and the well-dressed error in a civil register from 1796. Ages blur. Signatures reappear. The law, always more narrative than most lawyers will admit, weaves a story that returns them to the beginning and then cuts a new path from it. On paper, the marriage becomes a fact that was never quite what it seemed. In memory, it remains a ring that was never easy to remove. She leaves the Tuileries with a small procession. A carriage, a lady, a footman who has been with her since Rue Chantereine, and now watches the back of her head as if she might disappear into the velvet. The keys to apartments go to a steward. The key in the little dish goes with her. At Malmaison, she steps into rooms that recognize her tread, and the house exhales. She touches the banister. She looks out at the trees, bare at this season, and thinks of how even bare, a tree contains leaf and fruit in an invisible future. He marries again in 1810, this time to a woman whose name is an alliance and whose age is a promise of children. There is a ceremony with bows and music that pretends not to repeat what has already been done. A cradle will come. The city will cheer. Josephine will smile for the envoy who visits, and will not watch the newspapers carried past her gate. She dresses with care, as if courtesy were a garment that can make any body move gracefully, and perhaps it can. We do not allow the story to collapse into bitterness. They remain in correspondence and in a tenderness that moves like light through water, bending, altered, unbroken. He sends her plants, rare and stubborn. She sends him a word of weather, a note about a rose that refuses to bloom, and then blooms as if it had been planning the delay since the seed. When he falls from power for the first time, it will be too late, and too dangerous, for him to come to her garden, though for a day or two, Paris will whisper that he wished to. At Malmaison, nights end with a candle tamped out between finger and breath. The house collects objects like a memory palace, a locket with a strand of hair sealed in glass, a portrait miniature that refuses to age, a chest with a false bottom that hides letters now faded to the color of tea. On a marble table in a room painted the blue of certain oceans, a ring rests in a dish. Sometimes she picks it up and feels its weight. Sometimes she does not. The day after the annulment, a child working in the kitchens heard from a footman that the Empress, still Empress by courtesy, had not cried in public. The child reports this years later to a niece, who writes it down in a margin that will be found by a historian with patience and love for margins. Some truths are lost because they were never said where anyone could hear them. Some are preserved in ledger entries and in bruised fruit left uneaten on a plate. In this house, sex and power do not tear at the curtains. They settle into the fibers and wait to be dusted. And dust, if you have ever watched it in afternoon light, dances. Decades pass. The rosebeds at Malmaison grow a little wild, their branches leaning toward paths that have seen emperors and painters and children with no idea that history will remember them for carrying a tray. The house changes hands. So do the objects. A ring is sold one spring in a crowded room in Fontainebleau. Some say it is the Toi et Moi ring from 1796. Others insist it is merely similar. The catalog lists it. The receipts are not a diary. Record and legend argue politely, and then go home to separate addresses. Beneath floorboards at Malmaison during a renovation, carpenters find a small tarnished key near where a writing desk once stood. No note explains it. The hole nearby suggests a box long gone. In a drawer in a museum, a locket lies, hair turned to a fragile, ambered curve. The card beneath it reads only, "Tradition attributes this to Josephine." Tradition is not proof. Sometimes it is a kindness. In an archive tinged with dust and the tang of paper, a clerk's ledger bears a note that a delivery of camellias was billed twice in the spring of 1797. A curator draws a pencil line under it and smiles at the thought of a man who suspected more than he would have dared to say. In a library, a letter with softened wax tells a story everyone already knows but still reaches for. That love can be written down and yet escape the net. Historians dispute details. The degree of mutual understanding on that December night, the weight of Josephine's influence on policies that wounded people far from Paris, the extent of Napoleon's fidelity to any promise, Once it no longer served his argument with the future. We are left to care for nuance. Power and tenderness often share a room. They do not always share a bed. What survives is not certainty, but objects that remember touch. A ring warmed by pulse, a fan that snaps shut when a decision is made, a seal cooling in the dark like a star that still sends light, though the star itself is gone. At the end, where stories rest, imagine a marble table at Malmaison. There is a dish meant for rings. The window is open a crack. A candle gutters. Somewhere in the distance a bell thinks about midnight and decides against it. On the table, the ring turns once on the stone and comes to rest.